Welcome to Purple Sky News. All the news you probably missed but shouldn't have. Strap yourself in and get ready to have you mind blown. The news isn't what it used to be. Lies and manipulation run rampant. Here at Purple Sky News we bring the news that matters. Without further ado, here's today's story. Why alternative media is the new mainstream. By Ethan Indigo Smith. Contributing writer for Wake Up World. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox. There will be no highlights on the 11 o'clock news. The revolution will not be right back after a message. The revolution will not go better with Coke. Because the revolution will not be televised. Gil Scott-Heron. Let's face it, the mainstream media, like CNN, Fox News etc. are great at reporting on the surface understandings of surface issues, car accidents and plane crashes, shootings and robberies, as well as reinforcing why our latest foreign war or domestic loss of rights is good/necessary/ the only way to peace and security. But if you really want to investigate and comprehend what is actually going on in the world, and why, you have to go past the mainstream. Just look at the countless global events being reported by the underground news and compare it to the selective, politically biased fear of the mainstream. There is little journalistic integrity on display in the mainstream media, just the regurgitation of BS. And lots of it. Even the surface events reported in the mainstream are often filtered, distorted, and even blatantly constructed by media corporations that conceal their corporate and political alliances behind the guise of news. So, if you desire to go past the simplified what, where and when of a situation, to explore the deeper aspects of the who, why, how, it's crucial to look beyond the mainstream for your information. And, including this list of over 50 of the world's best alternative news and information outlets, this article is going to help you do it. The paperclip theory. No matter if it's a situation of politic or esoteric significance, there are a lot of historical facts that go undiscussed in the mainstream. The ongoing nuclear disaster at Fukushima is a perfect example. If you believe the mainstream news, Fukushima stopped being an environmental disaster several years ago. But it didn't. It is now approaching 6 years since the disaster began and it's worsening by the day. To the discerning mind, of course, this kind of omission opens a vacuum of new comprehension of old situations. That is to say, their omission raises a whole new why of the what. There are so many instances of this kind of whitewashing in the mainstream media that the act itself, a cultural sleight of hand, deserves its own name and phraseology. I believe that the term paperclip theory is applicable. It's as if there is an attachment to each story, paperclip to each news report, which outlines the real, whole story, the context that is not discussed and the agenda not disclosed on air. Take for example the US space program. After World War II, the USA imported as many as 1,500 Nazi scientists, technicians, and engineers, as part of Operation Paperclip, and many of these would-be war criminals most famously became part of NASA, the US National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Nazi aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun, for example, was one of the leading figures in the development of rocket technology in Nazi Germany, where he was also a member of the Nazi Party and the paramilitary organization Schutzstaffel. Following World War II, he was brought to the US to develop the rockets that launched the first US space satellite, Explorer 1, and first series of manned lunar missions, Project Apollo. Since then NASA has been caught red-handed, distorting and doctoring its images before public release, and even faking ISS, International Space Station, footage. That's a bit of history you won't see on television. And that's how the paperclip approach works. While the mainstream is quick to show footage of the latest rocket launch, garnering public support for the ongoing funding of NASA, the question of which other Nazi scientists ended up doing who knows what in the US space program, and to what end, is left to guesswork and research on websites through sources that are not part of the mainstream. In the meantime, those of us who bother to follow the information trail are simply written off by the mainstream as conspiracy theorists, despite the blatant manipulation of the visual images we see on our TV screens, As outlined in the eye-opening article, Digital Deception, Can You Trust What You See? Of course, the more one comprehends the more the seemingly nonsensical ways of the world, the more paperclip theories one encounters and the more things actually begin to make sense. But, if there is no understanding of the paperclip theory, of the story behind the story, then our understanding of the bigger picture is automatically limited in its focus and range. We become merely the observers of propaganda. The question then becomes, what is its purpose? We are in an information war and we are losing that war, and unfortunately we are paying a big price for it. We can't allow ourselves to be out-communicated by our enemies. There is other information out there. There are other points of view, and those points of view are profoundly damaging to a country that believes that its point of view is the only point of view. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton addresses a 2011 congressional committee, asking for additional funding to spread U.S. propaganda through the alternative media. As Hillary spelled out so clearly, the U.S. and the powers that control it believe their point of view is the only point of view. With funding from the U.S. Congress, this kind of thinking can only facilitate government-biased propaganda, not a considered analysis of world events, the players behind the scenes, or their motives. Unfolding the paperclip theory suggests there is an attached underlying file that accompanies the surface file attached by paperclip to their carefully crafted public perception files, just like the Nazi war engineers of World War II had secondary files outlining what was really going when they were brought to the US to continue their work. So why doesn't the mainstream media conduct more investigative journalism, and look beyond the paperclip, rather than just reporting on what they're told? Well, there is a paperclip theory there too. And you can begin your own investigative journalism in regards to the reporting practices of the mainstream news by looking into who owns the major media institutions. Today, 90% of American media is owned by just 6 companies, each with divested interests in a range of money-making activities, not just news. Let's take General Electric for example. The failed reactors at the Fukushima nuclear power facility catastrophe were designed by General Electric. Their design had been criticized as far back as 1972. The byproducts of their nuclear facilities have been fueling the nuclear arms industry for decades. GE also has a history of large-scale air and water pollution, with researchers at the Political Economy Research Institute listing the corporation as the 4th largest corporate producer of air pollution in the United States. It is no wonder, then, that the Fukushima nuclear disaster and other environmental calamities in which GE has an active and profitable hand, are not reported by NBC or Comcast, the largest broadcasting and cable company in the world. Nor is it a surprise that GE's colleagues at CBS, Time Warner, and News Corp aren't reporting on them either. The companies behind the mainstream media protect themselves by applying the philosophy, you don't report on my dodgy dealings, and I won't report on yours. Explains Andreas Papadakis Ph.D., a former nuclear scientist for classified government nuclear programs. The story that is paperclipped to the nuclear story goes a little like this. So why is the US government still advocating for nuclear energy? While the nuclear power plant is producing nuclear energy, it is also producing plutonium at the same time, which can be used to make nuclear bombs. That is very important for people to realize. In the United States, the Department of Energy finances and manages the nuclear weapons programs. In reality, the Department of Energy is basically the Department of Weapons. The building of nuclear power plants in the US began in 1943 to produce atomic bombs. It was not until 1957 that plants began to produce electricity, providing a continuous supply of plutonium to the nuclear weapons programs. With the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, official production of nuclear materials solely for weapons use ceased in the United States. However, U.S. government policy and funding decisions since that time have actively encouraged the development of greater nuclear energy capacity, which, of course, produces more plutonium waste for nuclear weapons development. If someone looks honestly at all of the facts, it is obvious that nuclear power fuels the nuclear bomb, which in turn fuels world domination. Andreas Papadakis, Ph.D. So, while the mainstream media supports the false promotion of nuclear energy as the future of green energy, while it refuses to discuss the failures of the nuclear industry, and while it conceals the industry's ties to governmental nuclear weapons development programs, it is clear we need to look elsewhere for the real story. Give mainstream propaganda the flick working to corporate agendas and government allegiances. Mainstream media has been found repeatedly obscuring and falsifying news, while blacking out important stories completely. As a result, public confidence in mainstream news has steadily declined over recent years, while alternative media, as it's labeled in the mainstream, has risen in its place, filling the void of real news, views, and analyses that go unheard and unexamined in mainstream circles. Really, how can facts be considered alternative? Thank you for tuning in. Stay awake and awaken others. Help us spread the word by sharing this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a like and let us know what you think in the comments below. And of course, subscribe for notifications of new videos. Don't watch fake news.